Welcome to Paranormal or Reality. On today's video, we explore the haunting Red Sea, where sailors have witnessed a ghost ship wandering around. Then we are off to explore the Queen Mary's haunted elevator, followed by the ghosty last calls of a sunk ship. Lastly, we inspect a rigged ship where one crew member never left. Now make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Let's begin. I haven't talked about this with very many people except a few friends over beers late at night, but I figure it's getting closer to Halloween, and there's no better time than now. It doesn't seem real even now as I'm trying to relive the incident. I was in the Navy for 4 years. I've seen a lot of strange things out in the middle of the ocean, but never anything like what I'm about to describe. One of the commands I was stationed at was on a coastal patrol boat in the Persian Gulf. Our primary tasking, among others, was to board fishing vessels and freighters to look for weapons, contraband, and narcotics. For security and privacy reasons, I won't reveal the vessel, crew members, or command names. One July evening in 2015, we were sailing in the northern portion of the Gulf off the coast of Iran. We received a distress call from a freighter around 2200 or 10 at night, stating that he had spotted a fishing vessel not under power, meaning it wasn't being driven, just drifting in the middle of a fairly populated shipping lane. He also stated he didn't see no lighting, signals, or crewmen, which led him to believe it was abandoned. We took down the coordinates and arrived in the area a half hour later. Finding the ship was difficult, but we were able to locate it using NVGs, night vision googles, and radar. Upon locating the vessel, we manned up one of our boarding teams, including myself, in an effort to climb aboard to sort out the situation. We had to be cautious. It isn't unheard of for terrorist forces to rig trap boats for us to board, then detonate them. A few sailors were killed 2 years before my deployment in the same way. We boarded safely and began our search. My team of 3 were directed to check out the lower decks, which included the crew's quarters and the engine room. We didn't find a shred of evidence that any people had even been living on board, which was extremely strange. I've boarded a lot of boats. Most of the time, these guys live on these things for weeks on end. To be brutally honest, they don't smell very good, and are usually pretty messy because of the lack of fresh water for bathing, cleaning, or going to the bathroom. The crew's quarters were extremely clean and eerily empty, which gave me an odd feeling that this may be an ambush of some kind. I'm not an explosive ordnance or disposal tech, but we are all trained to look for explosives, just not to disarm them. After a thorough search for any sign of explosives which came up clean, we came to the conclusion that the crew may have transferred to another vessel if this one broke down mechanically. We searched the engine room for signs of scuttling, intentional flooding, unintentional flooding, or engine failure, and found no evidence of any of these. Our captain came over our headsets explaining that the only option we had based on the situation at hand was to rig the vessel for tow and haul it to the next port of call we were headed to. After securing the vessel to ours with a heavy steel cable, with a huge rope designed for this specific purpose, we headed on a southerly course to continue our evening patrol. It's around 0300 in the morning, and I'm on night watch with 2 other guys in the pilot house of our boat. We had a roving lookout that would walk around the top deck with a rifle to scan the water and the sky for anything relevant. The lookout comes over the radio saying that he sees blue lights on and under the fishing boat we are towing. He says that he can see dark shapes moving around on the top deck as well, through his night vision, and they look like people. He asks for one of us to come and look, so I walk down, and sure enough I see the same thing he's seeing. Shadowy figures are walking around the deck. There are lights moving erratically around them and in the water around the boat. People are discernible through night vision. These figures look like shadows in the shape of people, almost like transparent in a way. The scene was not something I can describe as I would like. I guess you'd have to have seen it for yourself to know what I mean exactly. I ran down to the captain's quarters to tell him what we were seeing, to have him come up and take a look. When he got to the aft end of the ship, I'm not even exaggerating when we got there, a thick fog started to roll in and almost engulfed the entire area around us. It's hot in the Gulf. The humidity does produce a natural haze on the surface of the water at times. But this fog was unlike anything I had seen. It was like a white blanket. All we could see was the starlight above and this fog closing in. We all just stood there not knowing what to say, honestly. Our captain included. Before long, the fog had pretty much consumed the fishing boat and we lost sight of it. The tow line suddenly became extremely tight, as if the fishing vessel was pulling in the opposite direction. This was dangerous because if that line snapped, it could hurt someone on deck because of the material it's made out of. Our captain shouted the order to break the tow rig. Before we could unrig it, the line just fell and dropped into the water. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see anything 20 feet in front of me. As we hauled in the tow line, we saw that it had been severed clean through. This line is designed to haul many tons, and it's extremely difficult to cut. It looked almost like it had been cut with a massive razor, it was so clean. Our captain never called in the incident. His explanation was that the boat may have had stowaways that were hiding on board, and that's what we were seeing. We searched that boat from top to bottom. I was there to witness it with my own eyes. There was nobody on board. This wasn't the work of a stowaway crew playing some prank on the US Navy. I have never believed in ghosts or the paranormal, but I don't have any other way of explaining this incident other than that. We talked about it amongst ourselves for a few weeks, about the whole thing, and not too long after we were notified that another patrol boat had seen something similar, not far from where we witnessed the incident. The phenomenon has become somewhat of an inside joke amongst the sailors and Marines of that area. They are known as the phantom sailors of the Persian Gulf. Looking back on the situation now, I still can't believe it happened. It was surreal. At the same time, so vivid. Like I said, I haven't really recited this story a whole lot. Only with a few friends because I know it sounds crazy. To this day, I'm not entirely sure what I saw, but I know I won't forget it for the rest of my life. When my mom was in her late teens, her friend's father was an employee on the now docked ship and hotel, the Queen Mary. For those who don't know its history, the ship is renowned as one of the most haunted places to visit in America, has had plenty of deaths and unexplained encounters aboard over the years, and, while ferrying troops during WF2, collided with an escort ship, resulting in the deaths of over 300 men. My mother and her friend, being mischievous, decided to tour all the places inaccessible to guests and try to summon ghosts by taunting them. They walked around below deck in the boiler rooms and hallways, shouting things like, "We don't believe in ghosts, come out and prove us wrong." Then they reached the hall, at the bow of the ship where it struck its escort ship in 1942, a mostly empty, cavernous area where they continued their taunts, which echoed loudly off the metal walls. Suddenly they heard what my mother describes as a deafening sound, made up of a combination of sounds, like metal screeching and the sound of the ship groaning, as well as a high-pitched human screaming with a low, moaning echo that filled the chamber. All these sounds were not distinct. They were all one sound, like a menacing, cursed throat song. It was a sound unlike anything they had ever heard or would hear again. My mom was utterly shocked and terrified. They reached the closest elevator as fast as they could. Their game of taunting was abruptly over and done. But the spirits evidently were not, because as the elevator operator led them to the top deck, the three were surrounded by the unmistakable, prominent sound of rushing water. At this point, they wondered for a split second if they were being tricked, grasping for a logical explanation. To their horror, however, the operator was white as a sheet. He hastily dialing for help on the elevator phone. Of course, there wasn't any water. The employee on the other end was overwhelmed and perplexed. That sound persisted to swirl around them while they slowly approached the deck. They swear by it that the car was filling up by water. The girls couldn't get off the Queen Mary fast enough. No one on board could explain what happened either. Everyone was shaken. An encounter that lasted a matter of minutes seemed like hours, left them trembling and transformed. My mother never took the topic of ghosts lightly after that. She wouldn't let me have a Ouija board either. I was just talking to my uncle, who is a retired sailor, and he told me this story. My uncle used to work on board the Great Lakes freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson. They would haul iron ore and limestone across the Great Lakes. One day, at around 7 p.m. in November 2007, they were crossing Lake Superior on their way to Cleveland, Ohio, when they started receiving distress calls on their radio from an unknown vessel claiming to be the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. The only issue with that was the SS Edmund. Fitzgerald famously sank in 1975, taking all 29 crewmen with it. Well, he said at first, they all thought it was some kind of distasteful prank, until they checked the radar and found that there were no other ships around for at least 70 nautical miles. The range on the radios are only 60 nautical miles. He said that the voice they heard from the radio described a heavy storm with high winds, and they were having a hard time holding their own. My uncle said you could hear true fear in the man's voice from over the radio, but the thing was, there was no storm at all. In fact, the water was calm, and the night was clear. At around 8 p.m., my uncle describes that the distress calls on the radio came to an abrupt stop, leaving the whole room in a terrifying silence. The radio stayed quiet for the rest of the night. Nobody was able to sleep that night, haunted by what they had witnessed. When it comes down to it, there is a sense of irony in this event, being that the ship my uncle was on was the sister ship to the SS Arthur M. Anderson, but it was also the last ship to make contact with the Edmund Fitzgerald in 1975 before she sank. Could my uncle and his shipmates have actually made contact with the ghosts of the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald? Or could there be another explanation to this event? We'll never know, but it made one of the creepiest stories I've ever heard. This was about 6 years now, in early 2014. I'm a merchant mariner, and at the time was working on an American-flagged car carrier in the engineering department as an oiler. My whole life growing up, I've had some strange things happen to me. I've seen and felt some things. This is the first time it happens to me on a ship I was working on. I was on the midnight to noon watch with the third engineer. When I was in the middle of my readings one evening, I happened to notice an orange blur in my peripheral vision on the deck below, which was the lowest deck in the ER. I turned my head and caught just the glimpse of orange coveralls walking down the shaft. This wasn't the engineer or anyone else in the department, as we didn't wear coveralls. Our work outfit consisted of cargo, mechanic pants, and whatever shirt you owned. The deck guys, however, did wear orange, so I finished up my reading and walked down to the lower level to find him. I thought maybe it could have been the security on night watch, but they don't make rounds in the engineering spaces. So, I go down there and no one's there. Whatever, probably just tired, I thought, and finished my rounds. After finishing up, I turned in the sheet to the third control room, then stepped back out to go start on another project, when I saw the door to the tool room machine shop flap closed. Again, I thought probably a worker down here trying to steal a tool or something. So of course I go to the shop, and as I entered the door to the storage room was just closing, I continue to follow. There's no one in the storage room. The only other way out would be through the steering and up onto the main cargo deck. I continued into steering area, looked around again. I found nothing. On my way back out, I glanced into the hydraulics room when I finally saw him. He was facing away from me, looking at a panel. I almost just walked past him. I caught myself mid-step and shouted over the sound of the steering pumps to get his attention. The man jumped and was turning around when the ship lost power. Losing power was nothing new. This ship has had a faulty shaft generator for a while. It was pretty standard. I didn't think anything of it until I got my flashlight out of my pocket. The man was gone, like he was never there. I looked around, but I didn't see anything. I was starting to get a little nervous and jumpy at that point. But right before panic could set in, the diesel generators kicked in. The lights were restored. I returned to the control room to ask the someone if anyone had left the engine room through here. He said no. Cut to a few days later, I was talking with the boatswain's mate in the deck locker when I noticed a picture hanging almost as if it was a memorial. I asked him about it. He said it had been there for a while. The ship used to be Swedish flagged, and they had a death aboard back then before it became a US flagged. I sort of went quiet, then told him what I saw a few days ago. He just says, "Oh yeah, we catch glimpses of him roaming the cargo deck sometimes too." I didn't have anything else happen that trip, and we even got the shaft generator fixed in the next port. But still was sort of wild having that happen in the last place I'd ever expect. Thanks for tuning in. Watch another video if you dare.